Hey, it's Ben. So today I'm back for another live stream, Saturday Night Live. It's not exactly what I thought of or what I had in mind when I was during my adolescence when I was seeing the not ready for prime time players or something. But anyway, I was working with someone earlier, and it took me some time to prepare my notes. So I'm just now getting ready to present for today or this evening, actually. So this is part of what I'm presenting today is, again, knowing when to listen and to follow instructions, it's part of a series of, what will be a longer article and a series of live streams or videos about why people don't heal and how you can be one of the exceptional few who do. So, where do I begin with this? The thumbnail that I chose for this video too. I wanted to choose an image that in some way depicted one of the, I guess you'd say one or some of the ancient or the masters and those who'd attained mastery in some of the ancient spiritual traditions. And I was having trouble coming up with an image. And so the closest thing I could find was an image of, there were two Chinese masters that were renowned, and I forget the name of one of them, but the other, his name was Che Zai. And the the stories or accounts that I had heard of him were pretty amazing. Maybe some of it could be embellished or something, but I, having witnessed um, these levels of mastery, having spent years training with Shifu Li Tailiang in the internal martial arts of Xing Yi Quan, Baguazhang, Tai Chi, and Qigong, it's I don't doubt that he could have done a lot of these things. I think there's one account where, and some of these martial artists would challenge one another, and getting a bit egotistical. And so apparently there was a samurai, from Japan who was spending some time in China and challenged Che Zai to a duel or a fight or something. And he had his samurai sword or whatever, and Che Zai just had this little knife, maybe about so long. And so the story goes that, within about a minute or so, all of a sudden, the samurai's hand, which was gripped around the handle of his sword, falls to the ground with the sword. And there was the other master who was in the photograph that I used in the thumbnail. There was an account that he too challenged Che Zai at one point, and Che Zai jumped to the side or moved to the side very quickly and was coming down in a certain kind of strike is referred to as Pichuan. And, it's this kind of over movement and coming down. But his, the bottom of his fist, he stopped right next to this other master's temple. And the other master humbled him in that instance. It's like, realizing that he could have, Che Zai could have inflicted some very serious damage, if not taken his life, had he followed through with that strike. But the internal martial arts have their roots in Taoism, which is this ancient system that emerged from China. And there's the fighting combat aspects of this training that you go through. But there's also a great deal of internal practice, Qigong practices where you're developing, over the years, those who attain mastery develop this extraordinary internal power. And so there are many instances where, say, if someone were to attack one of these masters, they could actually, that individual could direct that force back into the attacker, and it would cause internal injuries in the attacker. If they were to strike the other person, strike an individual in combat, using that internal force or power, it would, in many instances, could break bones, rupture internal organs. They possessed pretty intense power. Or they could, many instances, use that power and send the person flying across the room. So the chi power that they used, I mean, they would do just hours of intensive daily practice and continually building that internal force or power, getting stronger and stronger over time. But the chi power had multiple applications, and there were thousands of different practices or variations of Qigong. A lot of this was passed down in various lineages over hundreds of years, or maybe thousands. I'm not sure how far it goes back, and passed down in secret. But the chi power could be used in terms of, for fighting or combat. It could be used to facilitate healing in the body of an individual. Actually, the father of Shifu Li Tailiang, he was, I don't know, maybe 5'3" or something when I saw him. You get older, you shrink down a little bit. And so Shifu was telling me about how his father was, he's also trained in the Chinese medical traditions. And so he was up around the Mongolian border, and there was a rather large man who attempted to rob him, assault him. And so he employed this certain technique. It's from the rooster form, and you just, you kind of curl under with your shoulder and use that force of your shoulder, but also that internal power. And it knocked this rather large man unconscious. And so the old master sitting there patiently with his cane, and he's directing this healing power towards that rather large man that he had knocked unconscious. And the man regained consciousness after a while, and he was pretty intimidated, pretty threatened by this little master who was sitting there calmly, patiently transmitting healing power to the individual who had tried to assault him. So, but anyway, I've been fortunate to train with extensively with two individuals who have attained mastery in these various ancient spiritual traditions, or at least do extensive training. And there are others that I've spent time with and have learned some things, but mainly two teachers that I've worked with over the years. At 20, I began to apprentice with Horace Dokai, one of the last surviving traditional doctors among the Kiowa tribe. And so Horace would, during the apprenticeship, he would take portions of his own healing gifts that he possessed, and he would transmit those portions to me. At the time he did that, he'd have someone standing behind me to hold me so I didn't fall and split my head open, but I would feel this tremendous impact as this force would hit my body, and it would literally knock me unconscious. And then as part of the training, you would have me go out to fast alone in the mountains. The vision quest, you go out and fast the 4 days and nights with no food and water. And this is part of how you earn the right to work with these gifts of healing. But also, as you continue to go, you develop even you receive additional gifts of healing. You develop the power you possess increases so you can help more people. And then years later, starting in 2002, I spent about 17 years training with Shifu Li Tailiang in the internal martial arts of Xing Yi Quan, Baguazhang, Tai Chi, and Qigong. So, I spent enormous amounts of time with both of these individuals. I lived with Horace, in his home, with his family, and traveled with him throughout New Mexico, Arizona, up into Nevada, back and forth to Oklahoma. He was known all throughout what they refer to as Indian country. And then Shifu, I would see him usually about once a week or so, when I would be in the New York City area where he resided. And I trained with him privately. And for some reason, he passed on a lot of practices, applications for these practices, Qigong practices to develop the internal power, and a lot of fighting applications and stuff, usually that they don't teach or pass on to very many people. So I'm, again, very fortunate in that respect. And with both Shifu Li Tailiang and my mentor Horace, both have attained extraordinarily high levels of mastery, and yet there were other aspects of them that, being human, were not quite so evolved. And so sometimes maybe they would be offering their opinion to me or encouraging me to do something, and I just felt intuitively that it really wasn't in my best interest. And so I just told them, I said, no, I don't agree. I asserted my boundary and just held my ground. And I think on some occasions they were a little uncomfortable with that, but it's important, that we not blindly follow. We can, whether you're, say, for instance, if you're wanting to learn a martial art, if you, there are a few individuals who, among the Native Americans here or there, that maybe they just had some kind of gift or power come to them, where they would be possessed to go of their own volition on the vision quest and would develop some kind of extraordinary gift. But for the most part, the vast majority of us who have trained in these traditions, we would apprentice. We would have a mentor that we would apprentice under, and it was typical. These traditional native doctors, they would take on maybe one or just a few apprentices, usually towards the end of their life. And because they wanted these gifts, these healing powers, to continue. And so I was about, 20 or so, and remember we were about to go in this peyote meeting, and I was so afraid that Horace would chase me out of there, say, "You're white, this is only for Native Americans." But I remember that evening he just stopped and he stared at me like he knew something in that moment. I think he knew from that time that I would go on to apprentice with him. And then about a year or so later, when my grades are starting to go down in college, because I wasn't doing what I needed to do with my life as of yet. And so I approached him, and I was really afraid, again, that he would say, "Oh, this only works for Native people. You can't learn these things." But when I told him I wanted to learn from him, and he says, "Well, what are you doing this weekend? Can you start fasting?" So he had me go drive down into the Wichita Mountains and sit in my car fasting, not eating or drinking. And after 2 days, told me where to meet him. I can't really tell that anything happened during that time, those 2 days fasting in the car, but I think he just wanted to make sure that I was serious, so that if he was going to invest his time and effort into me, that it was a worthwhile investment. So discernment is key here. That there are individuals who have attained mastery. There are also a lot of people who claim to possess some kind of gift or healing power or mastery, assume the role of guru or whatever. But there are people that pretend but don't necessarily possess any kind of gift or power or whatever. So yeah, we definitely need that discernment so we can recognize, one, if someone doesn't really possess any special gift or power, or two, if they do, if they've attained mastery in whatever spiritual tradition, and if they have, we need to know when to listen. If they're just kind of in those parts of themselves that are more, as I said, less evolved, more opinionated, or whatever their dysfunctional aspects. No, we can disregard that, but there are times with my mentor, as I said, with Horace and with Shifu Li Tailiang, I could feel when they were really connected with that presence, that power. And it's like, wow, there's something really profound here. I need to really be paying attention. And so I did when it came to training. And when they were sharing some profound insight, or when they were actually, like Horace would be transmitting portions of his healing gifts, yeah, I paid very close attention in those moments. One cause for concern, though, in times past, India is a really good example of this. There are a lot of people in the Hindu Vedic tradition, some of these yogis, gurus, sadhus, and from my sense of it, things, what I've read, accounts that I've heard, in times past, they were much more disciplined. It was very much, as I said, a discipline. And people were just very serious about it. There was very common that there are many individuals who would dedicate their lives to doing extensive practice. I mean, just 6, 8 or more hours of intensive meditation, yogic practices, all that. And a lot of them develop just extraordinary powers, this mind-blowing capabilities and all. But there were quite a few of these individuals, and there were just many to be found, wandering through the countryside. A lot of them didn't have much care or concern for material possessions, lived very simplistic lives, but they just spent their days doing, just as I said, hours and hours of intensive practice. And some people would also seek out those individuals, a young, what's the word, aspirant who wanted to follow in this tradition would seek out these individuals, seek out a teacher. And there were many others referred to as householders who, they had their spouse and their children. They were, part of a family, and they couldn't be what's referred to as an aesthetic, but they could, but they had their guru, or that spiritual teacher that they followed. And during those days, it was, things were much cleaner. And they were serious about what they were doing. It was just hardcore discipline. But as time went on and you had these gurus that started making their way to the West, and they'd come over here and they'd end up having groupies like the rock bands, like rock stars do. And and some of them were really acting out, having their sexual escapades. And on one hand, there were some who would tell their devotees to be celibate, but on the other hand, they were banging their devotees of choice. So they were, again, acting out sexually and getting caught up in all kinds of other dysfunction. And there are times where I've gone to some of their events, and it just felt like a circus. And I could feel some spiritual power, but on the other hand, I could feel all this crazy ass dysfunction, all the stuff that was coming out of people's bodies. I could feel that floating through the atmosphere. It can be pretty messy sometimes, but now when it comes to a jump track a bit, when we're growing up in, here in our mainstream culture here in North America, as we grow up from kindergarten through 12th grade, and even those of us who pursue, go beyond to college, to earn various, to study medicine or law or into any other profession, we're taught, from an early age to listen to our instructors, our teachers, our professors, and to follow instructions. And those who are unable or maybe don't have enough sense to do so, many times they flunk out of school. They don't do so well academically. And unfortunately for them, often it leads to like reduced opportunities for, reduced career choices, and often ending up having to take shit jobs for substandard pay. But anyway, so as I said, we're taught to listen and follow instructions. And now when it comes to, as I said, I spent years training from Horace, my mentor, and Horace passed on portions of his own healing gifts. So, and having gone through this training, received this transmission of power, and also having gone through dozens of vision quests, I work with the same healing gifts or powers that many of the Native American doctors have possessed and worked with for hundreds or thousands of years. But working in this culture can be very challenging at times. And a lot of it is because people just don't have any real frame of reference for this sort of healing. I mean, this culture, you have people go through 3 weekend workshops and they think they're master healers. and people just don't know. They don't understand. They don't really have any real healthy models, of like you find in these other cultures where people possess these really profound gifts of healing and other kinds of spiritual powers. So sometimes people would come to me, for instance, seeking healing. But I have people, they come in and they say, I'll try a session. And yet a lot of these people have like really serious health-related issues, are emotional wounding, and in many instances, a combination of both. The emotional wounding, the health-related issues they're struggling with, have caused them so much discomfort that they've suffered terribly. Goes back many years, usually for decades in the making. And yet, they come in and they think okay, I'll try a session. I'll see what I think about it. And well, to be honest, that's really a incredibly stupid ass approach to healing. And I know that may trigger some people to speak in that way, but seriously, I mean, if what happens if you were to have, if you're dealing with some health related issues, and you could you can have the most potent, the most effective herbal supplements are, medicinal herbs or supplements. And what happens if you take that once or maybe just a few times? Probably not much of anything. You're not going to really notice much of any difference. And two, if you were to seek out intervention, like if you had decided to pursue a more conventional allopathic approach to medicine, and you're going to go to a specialist is highly knowledgeable in treating, addressing those specific issues. Would you go to that individual and say, oh, I'm just going to try out, I'm going to try it out once and see what I think? No, that would be stupid. I mean, there are times, yes, there are times when you get something that, and I've worked with many people where they've gone to a physician, they're recommending some kind of really invasive approach or something, and you just get a gut feeling. It's like, ooh, and you consult maybe another physician or two or something, or maybe you do decide to not undergo chemotherapy and radiation, and you choose to, when you understand the consequences, maybe you would choose to follow some more holistic approach to healing. But there are many instances where you go to, it's a condition that it's relatively straightforward, the treatment involved, and you don't just go and say, oh, I'm just going to try it once and see what I think. I mean, you go and you follow through. And it's the same thing when you work with a traditional healer, or you work with someone in any of the other ancient spiritual traditions. It's very important. I mean, like, for instance, I began my training at the age of 20? And when was that? 2002. And I began to practice took me about 5 years. So I've been in practice for over 35 years now. And having worked with thousands of people individually, having, and being an observer, just observing people with a wide range of whatever it is, emotional wounding or specific health related issues. So I have a pretty good understanding based upon having worked with, again, thousands of people and observing how they've progressed. If it's a condition if it's something that I can't work with, that I know that the type of healing that I facilitate is not going to address their needs or be that effective, I'm going to tell the person straight out, I don't want to waste my time or theirs. I want to steer them in the direction to seek the intervention that they need that's going to be more effective for their particular needs and stuff. And yet, if it's a condition that I can work with, whether it has to do with their emotional wounding or some physiological health related issue. I mean, for instance, I've people with digestive disorders, colitis, Crohn's disease, irritable bowel, all these things, people injured in automobile accidents. These kinds of conditions respond very, very well to the type of work I do. And there have been times where people have shown up, did a session or two, and disappeared. Oh, and other times, for years, I have worked with people with histories of childhood trauma, emotional, physical, childhood sexual trauma. And the fact that you have so many people that they spent their lives just numbing themselves to their emotions, avoiding the issues that they haven't wanted to deal with, distracting themselves. And so, because of that, they hold like years of all this residual emotional garbage and backlog of all these unprocessed emotions and all the stresses that from their day-to-day lives that they haven't processed, in addition to even more the wounding of these deeply traumatic events. And and so sometimes people come in, they do a session, and what often happens is that all these emotions start surfacing, and memories as well. That can be uncomfortable. It can be disconcerting. But I go to great efforts to explain to people what's happening, how the emotions and memories surface. I encourage them to pick up the phone and call me. And I go the extra mile. I pick up the phone. I call them. I check in. I want to know how they're doing. And people, I've worked with many people who experience severe trauma, sometimes even going back to infancy. And it can be very trying at times, especially if they call me up and they're in the midst of a panic attack. And I have to, or I choose to take that time and I walk them through the panic attack, diffusing all that overwhelming anxiety, get them to where they're grounded, where they're calming down, they're managing their emotions. But I'll do whatever it takes. I'll take people by the hand and walk them through the abyss, get them to where they're back on solid ground. And I've worked with many people over the years, with varying degrees of trauma, people who were not very functional. And in the course of working with them, they became much calmer, much more stable, much more highly functional. Over time, as more and more that trauma was healed and transformed, and this is a process. Sometimes it could take a year or even a few years with people who have extensive histories of trauma, but watching these individuals even get to a place where they were, calm, easygoing, and becoming more and more highly functional in their lives. But I see what has been so disappointing at times. There have been instances where people, and based on previous experience, having worked with so many other people with these same kinds of issues, same kind of emotional wounding, health-related issues, all that, had they listened, had they followed through, these issues would have healed. They would have gotten to a much, much better place. But if they didn't listen, they didn't follow through, the emotions came up, they didn't want to face it, didn't want to deal with it, they bolted. Oh well, too bad. They aborted their healing. And if there was something else out there, some other resource that would have addressed these issues sufficiently, I would have just wished them well and, okay, fine, if that works for you, cool. But in so many instances, and I've run into some of these people months, years later, sadly, many of them are still in pretty bad shape. And if we don't address these issues, often what happens, it gets worse. Those health-related issues, the emotional wounding, it gets worse if we don't deal with it. Although I've had some people that initially maybe they reacted, disappeared, flaked out, whatever, and months, even years later, called me up, apologetic, rescheduled, came back in, we picked up, and then we were able to make the headway. They followed through, and we were able to effect the much needed healing. So I understand when you're trying out different practices or healing modalities, a lot of times, in the beginning, being that most of us, we haven't grown up in these ancient traditional cultures, so we don't know. A lot of this is new. It's unfamiliar to us. We don't really have much of a point of reference. So sometimes we may want or even need to test things out before we really make a commitment. I was in that position because in my mid 20s, when all the trauma of my childhood and adolescence was surfacing, I was reenacting that in my attempts to form relationships. Yeah, I tried out a lot of different practices, healing modalities. There were a few things I thought were just, I didn't write off. I just didn't get a sense that they were effective at all, and but part of it too is like, I've over the years, I've become like a connoisseur of practices and healing modalities. So there's some things I just knew it was not all that effective. But if I got a sense that any practice or healing modality was having a positive effect on me at all, I would thoroughly test it out. Not just once or twice, but I mean, I would take weeks or often months and years continue to work with these modalities. I would really push the limits. Like, I was suffering so badly and I was so determined. It was like, what do I have to do to heal these deep emotional wounds? And so I was just really hardcore and I would just dive in. And so whatever practice, whatever healing modality, I just have done tons of deep tissue body work. Whenever I had the chance, I found a gifted healer. I would just get my ass in there and get as many sessions as I possibly could. And I've been relentless, making my way back to the Wichita Mountains and through those 4 days and nights alone on top of the mountain, no food, no water, all kinds of, sometimes it's just temperatures up in the 90s, other times, dropping down into the teens. I'd be freezing my ass off, just buried under 6-8 inches of snow and lightning striking the ground around me and just all kinds of stuff, but it's just that commitment. Like, what does it take to heal? Just deal with it, just go through it. And so if we're going to explore different healing modalities, it's important to be consistent, to demonstrate commitment and to be consistent. And anytime you have the opportunity to work with someone, a gifted healer such as myself, if you work with people of other ancient spiritual traditions, yeah, you don't, again, as I said, you don't want to follow blindly. I mean, there are instances, and I like to explore, I like to know what's out there. And people are doing different kinds of, following different spiritual traditions and doing different practices. And if I can see that it's really benefiting them, they're growing, they're evolving, I want to know about it. And so I'll go check it out. And there have been instances where I've encountered people that possess tremendous power. And I've seen them just doing things that I felt were unethical, that were abuses of power. And there were instances where I have confronted some of these individuals. Even my own mentor, Horace, when he was getting out of line at one point, I was, I think 21, 22 or something at that point. And I wasn't very happy about some things I saw him doing. And I just said, Horace, sometimes I think you're a real asshole. I don't think I ever saw anyone get under his skin as much as I did. It really shook him up at that point because people tended to be very reverent or deferential. And that was the very commonplace among the Native Americans when you had these like really extraordinarily powerful doctors. And but at that point, as I said, Horace was doing some things, misbehaving a bit, and I called him out on it. But when you're working with one of the traditional doctors, Native American doctors, gifted healers of other traditions, are those who've attained mastery, like in the internal martial arts, rooted in Taoism, or the Hindu Vedic tradition, the Sufi masters, for instance, Tibetan lamas, other Buddhist monks, other adepts of other ancient spiritual traditions. It's important to understand that these individuals, those of us who follow these paths, it's like we commit our lives to these disciplines, and we've undergone just extraordinary development. And not only that, we carry what's referred to as a transmission, maybe multiple transmissions of these powers, special gifts and healing powers that have been passed down over the centuries that can benefit you on many levels. They can help you to heal your body and mind, to develop certain spiritual awareness or gifts or capabilities, all kinds of things. So you can benefit tremendously. And so if you have an opportunity to work with any of us who have attained mastery in any of these traditions, these lineages, it's very important that as long as we're keeping ourselves in line and we're working within our capacity, that you do listen, you do follow instructions. Again, it's not about this new agey expression of, what is it? You're giving your power away. No, it's like, when you were in high school or college or whatever professional education you might have pursued, you didn't say giving your power away because you listened to your teacher or your professor or anything. You needed to listen. Otherwise, if you don't listen, you're not going to know what the fuck you're doing. And when you even when you graduate, you leave the world of academia and you move into your profession of choice, and you listen to colleagues who have more experience in the profession, and you listen to your employers in order to gain the insights and understanding so that you too become proficient within that realm. So when you're following, when you're have the opportunity to learn or train with someone who has attained mastery in these traditions, similarly, you also need to know when to listen and follow instructions. Let me refer to my notes because I want to just see. Yes, so when people work with me individually, I find it challenging to work with people in this culture, one, because you have so many people who have gone through their lives, just spent much of their lives just avoiding and distracting themselves from the issues they haven't wanted to deal with, numbing themselves to the emotions they haven't wanted to feel. And so when people do that, that creates a profound disconnect. And so much of the population is, in many respects, very disconnected from their feelings and their physical bodies. There's this varying degrees of dissociation. Maybe not what you would fall into the clinical category or classifications of, it's not like you have depersonalization or derealization or something like that, but it is very much a form of dissociation. You're very disconnected from your feelings and your physical body. You're not as present here in this physical world reality. And that in itself, again, is a form of dissociation. And so it could often take, maybe, most people, I'd say a good 5 sessions to get people really connected to their bodies and their emotions. You need to be connected with their emotions because a lot of people, when they suppress their emotions, they're blind. They can't see what the fuck they're doing, It's that, they're enacting all kinds of crazy ass dysfunctional patterns, and they have various pathologies manifesting in their body. And a lot of it is because they're so numb and disconnected, and they have all this, traumas they're holding in their body and all the stress and everything. And so since they can't process it emotionally, then it expresses itself through their bodies. It's a huge mess. And it could take at least a good 5 sessions to get people, as I said, reconnected with their bodies, or maybe connected for the first time, and connecting and integrating and thoroughly digesting their emotions and opening up that awareness, so they're seeing and feeling and they're connecting the dots and stuff. Another thing too is that you have so many people, absolute shit diets. People eat absolute fucking garbage. You go in the supermarket, aisle after aisle after aisle of just stuff that people shouldn't be stuffing in their mouths, but much of the population does. And then, again, all that numbing out. People self-medicate with alcohol, other recreational drugs. A lot of people on anti-anxiety and antidepressants because they don't want to feel, because they haven't learned to work constructively with their emotions. Now, I'm not going to say that, some people need psychotropic meds. Maybe I would say some people, psychotropic meds are the best known solution, but there are also a lot of people who just never learn to work effectively with their emotions. Because of that, they become overwhelmed. They have a reduced processing capacity because they haven't learned to deal with their emotions. So because of that, they get triggered. They go through a breakup, some other really painful experience, death of a loved one, and the loss of a job, and they're just flooded with emotion, and and they're a big mess. But you learn to work constructively with your emotions, then you can process them. But it's a process. It takes time. But anyway, back on track. People suppress their emotions, garbage diets, vegetate, sit in front of the TV hours and hours and hours, binging on Netflix, scrolling endlessly through social media. Their bodies become very stagnant. A lot of just all that stress, all that emotion they're not processing, it settles into the body. It becomes very thick, very dense, very congealed. And, the first, I'd say 3 sessions are largely about cleaning up, helping people to dissolve and digest that stagnation, dissolving the layers of emotional body armor, starting to get people more connected. Maybe sessions 4 or 5, their bodies are becoming considerably more responsive. Sessions like 6, 7, 8, 9, and beyond, that's when their bodies are becoming very, very malleable, responsive. There are times where, I can just feel their bodies, physical, subtle bodies. I could just feel their bodies and minds just, it becomes very interactive. Their bodies and minds are interacting with this. I work as a conduit. I have this extraordinary, powerful healing presence working through me to facilitate healing within the bodies and minds of those I work with. And I could feel their bodies and minds working. It's this cooperative venture working in conjunction to facilitate the much needed healing. But initially, the first could be 3, 5, 6 sessions might be thawing the person's body out, getting the person's body to a point where they can be receptive, where they can receive the healing and get the results they want. But if a person doesn't listen, says, oh, I want to think about it. If a person's so numb, they can't feel a damn thing, and they do one session or they disappear because some emotions get surface, and then they end up living with all that stagnation. They end up living with their, hey, I'm just going to be honest here. They end up living with their fucked upness. They end up living with the emotional issues that could have healed, the trauma that could have healed. They end up living with the physical health conditions, the pathology that could have healed because they didn't follow through. And so again, if we want to get the results, it's when I was training with Horace, I needed to listen so that I developed, so that I myself could develop these gifts of healing. In training with Shifu Li Tai Liang in the internal martial arts, I also had to listen carefully, one, so I didn't injure myself, end up with some disability. I needed to listen so I didn't do irreparable damage to someone else. I mean, you could, if you're being stupid about it and you strike somebody in the temple or, like somewhere around the occipital lobe, you could permanently disable somebody. Bad thing. So, and same thing, you're working with the gifted healer, especially like, as I said, for over 35 years now, having worked with thousands of people, I know what responds. I've working with digestive and respiratory disorders, people injured in serious automobile accidents, including people with traumatic brain injuries, all these different issues, these conditions, I have vast amount of experience with. If it's something I haven't worked with, yeah, I'll just tell a person right out. But so many things I have worked with for decades and have vast amounts of experience. Again, Native Americans, they were taught. There's this, Native elders would teach the younger generations when you're working with the traditional doctors, they'd say, look, these individuals have put their lives on the line by going through the vision quest, by going through all these intensive austerities to develop the gifts of healing, to facilitate the healing on your behalf that would not otherwise be possible. And so Native people, when they would approach the traditional doctors, would make an offering, usually offerings of tobacco and certain kinds of feathers and items and such. And then when the native doctor would agree to work with this individual, he or she would specify and say, okay, I agree to work with you. In doing so, it's going to involve, this many sessions. Here are the other things you also need to do in conjunction in order to get the benefit, in order for this intervention to be truly effective. And so, in a similar way, when, as I said, you're working with a gifted healer, you're working with someone from these other traditions as well. And those of us working within these traditions, when we're working with our capacity, you're going to get much better results, whether it's healing the deep emotional wounds, healing the trauma, healing your physical body, or just evolving spiritually. It's those that I have the opportunity to work with, when those who do follow through, especially when I have the opportunity to work with people over, people that I've worked with for months and even years that have continued to come back. I see people who carried enormous trauma, were overwhelmed, couldn't manage their emotions, but in time, it took all those overwhelming emotions. It's like they were digesting those deeply traumatic experiences, digesting all those highly charged emotions. They became much calmer, much more integrated, more grounded, more relaxed, more easygoing. They began to develop, as you're able to process all those emotions, that trauma, it opens up, it makes available to you much more. You gain access to a lot of additional bandwidth. So I've watched these people developing, new resources, new capabilities, continually expanding their range of motions, also cleaning up their relationships, letting go of unhealthy attachments, and attracting into their lives companions with whom they could create much more meaningful and fulfilling relationships. Anyway, I'm sure I probably veered around a bit. It's so much that I want to include and make sure I don't forget anything that's important here, but a lot to chew on here. By the way, If you find value in what you're hearing, be sure to click like. I should have mentioned that earlier. If you're really inspired, subscribe to my channel. And also, if you're facing challenges in your intimate or not so intimate relationships, you're in the midst of breakup or divorce, struggling with patterns of abandonment or rejection, unrequited love, just keep choosing partners that abandon and abuse you. If you're facing health challenges or challenges even in other areas of your life, your professional life, whatever, it could either be a challenge resolution or heart-mending strategy session. We'll do what, address your needs, whatever they may be. You'll find the link below, so feel free to go on my Calendly, which is a scheduling app, and you can book a free 20-minute session with me, and we'll address if there are other solutions I think are effective, other resources, I'll turn you on to that, things you may have not considered or been aware of. And if I could be of assistance to you as well, I will let you know that as well. So I think that's good for now. Talk to you soon. Bye now.